I built my marriage on trust, believing love could overcome any challenge. I never doubted my wife's loyalty, thinking that the bond we shared was unbreakable. My cousin was like a brother to me, someone I confided in, laughed with, and shared family memories alongside. I trusted both of them completely, never imagining that either could betray me. Every dinner, every conversation, every shared secret felt like a thread in the fabric of my life. I believed that family and love were my strongest pillars. I never imagined that the very people I trusted most would choose deception over loyalty. I built my marriage on faith, on the belief that love was stronger than any hardship, that loyalty was unbreakable, and that the woman I married would never turn her heart away from me. Every day, I gave her my attention, my care, my devotion, and my complete trust. I thought that trust was the foundation of a happy marriage, that by loving her unconditionally, I would create a life of security and mutual respect. I treated her as my equal, as my partner, and I believed she treated me the same. I believed our bond was strong enough to survive anything, strong enough to overcome challenges, misunderstandings, or difficulties, because love, when it is real and rooted in respect, can endure anything. I never questioned her intentions, her loyalty, or her dedication to our life together. Every smile, every affectionate touch, every moment of kindness reassured me that I had chosen the right partner, someone who valued honesty and commitment as much as I did. At the same time, I had a cousin I had grown up with, someone I considered more than family, someone I trusted with my life, someone whose friendship I believed was unshakable. We shared childhood memories, adolescent struggles, and adult challenges. We celebrated achievements together and supported each other during failures. I confided in him about my deepest fears, my regrets, and my hopes for the future. I treated him like a brother, believing that family ties were sacred and that he would never betray me. I never imagined that someone so close to me, someone I had shared everything with, could ever act in a way that would cause me pain. I assumed that the bond of blood, the shared history, and the mutual trust we had built over decades were stronger than any temptation or desire. I also shared small joys with both my wife and my cousin. Family dinners, weekend gatherings, casual conversations, laughter that echoed across our homes. All these moments gave me a sense of security and happiness. I believed that honesty was the thread that connected all of us, that our relationships were built on truth, and that nothing could break the trust we had established over the years. I believed in transparency, in loyalty, and in the goodness of the people closest to me. I never imagined that the very people I trusted most could hide secrets so devastating that they would change my life forever. I believed that love and family were inseparable, that the bonds I had cherished were unbreakable, and that betrayal was something that happened to strangers, not to the people you lived with and shared your heart with every day. Every morning, I woke with the hope that my home was a safe place, a sanctuary of love, trust, and understanding. I never thought I would return home one day to discover that everything I held dear had been tainted by deceit. I never expected that the woman who had shared my bed, my heart, and my life would secretly undermine everything we had built together. I never expected that the cousin I had raised, protected, and celebrated would use my trust as a weapon, working behind my back to betray me. I believed that love, trust, and family were sacred, and I placed my faith in them completely. I never left room for doubt, because doubt had no place in a life built on unconditional trust. I never imagined that this trust could be exploited, twisted, and shattered by the very people I had opened my heart to. I also believed in the little things, the daily gestures that seemed small but were, in my eyes, significant. When she asked for help with chores, when we shared moments of quiet companionship, when my cousin asked for advice or support, I gave freely, never suspecting ulterior motives. I never hesitated to lend an ear, to offer guidance, to be a shoulder to lean on. I never imagined that these acts of kindness, these simple demonstrations of trust, would be used as opportunities to deceive me, to betray me in ways that would leave lasting scars. I never anticipated the quiet manipulation, the the secretive glances or the whispered messages that were taking place just beyond my perception. I never imagined that my heart, my trust, and my love could become tools in a betrayal I could never have foreseen. I believed that trust required patience, that love demanded understanding, and that loyalty was the glue that held families and marriages together. I gave my wife the benefit of the doubt in every situation. I gave my cousin the benefit of the doubt in every decision. I never doubted their intentions, their honesty, or their dedication to me and to the family. I assumed that our shared history, our love, and our loyalty would prevent any harm. I trusted completely because that was who I was, a man who believed in the strength of love, the sanctity of family, and the inviolability of trust. I gave my heart fully, expecting nothing less than honesty, respect, and fidelity in return. And yet, despite every act of love, despite every demonstration of trust, despite every effort to build a life rooted in loyalty and care, betrayal found its way into the very heart of my home. The people I trusted most, the woman I had loved with every fiber of my being, and the cousin I had considered a brother, conspired in secret, weaving lies and deception behind my back. I never saw it coming because I had built my life on faith, on belief, on the assumption that love and trust were enough to prevent harm. I had underestimated human weakness, desire, and duplicity. I had placed my trust in people who ultimately valued their own gratification over honesty, loyalty, and love. It was a cruel lesson, one that left a mark deeper than any wound I had ever experienced. I learned that trust, no matter how complete, can be betrayed. I learned that love, no matter how pure, can be exploited. I learned that even the strongest bonds of family can be broken by secrecy and deceit. And I also learned that knowledge, preparation, and courage are the tools to reclaim your dignity when betrayal strikes. I discovered that revenge, when executed with patience and precision, is not just about punishment, but about restoring the balance that treachery destroys. Now, as I look back on that time, I want you to understand the depth of my trust, the completeness of my love, and the blindness with which I gave my heart. I want you to feel the shock, the disbelief, and the despair that came when I discovered the betrayal. I want you to understand that this story is not just about heartbreak. It is about the journey from pain to action, from deceit to exposure, and from vulnerability to power. I am telling you this because there is value in understanding human behavior, in seeing the consequences of misplaced trust, and in recognizing the strength it takes to confront betrayal openly and honestly. Before I continue with the next part of my story, the subtle changes, the signs I ignored, the growing suspicion, and the ultimate discovery, I ask you to share where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I ask you to subscribe to this channel so my stories can reach more people, so my experiences, my lessons, and my warnings can be shared widely. Because trust, betrayal, and revenge are universal human experiences, and understanding them can help others recognize danger before it strikes. This story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has loved deeply, trusted completely, and faced the unimaginable pain of betrayal. In the months before I discovered the betrayal, I began noticing small changes in my wife's behavior. Changes so subtle at first that I convinced myself I was imagining them. Her laughter, which had always been warm and inclusive, now lingered longer when my cousin visited. She would smile at him in a way that felt different, more intimate, almost conspiratorial, and I brushed it off, telling myself it was simply friendship or a familial bond. Yet, each time I looked at her, there was a faint tension, a hidden spark, something in her eyes that did not belong to the ordinary interactions we once shared. It was as if she held back pieces of herself, pieces that were never meant for me to see. She started volunteering for small favors with him, offering to bring him coffee, asking him for help with trivial tasks, or finding excuses to walk with him to the car or to the garden. These gestures seemed harmless, polite even, but I began to notice a rhythm in their interactions that felt rehearsed, like two people sharing a secret they did not want the world to know. They would exchange glances that lasted a little too long, smiles that seemed private and meaningful only to them, and subtle touches that I could sense but not fully see. At first, I rationalized these moments, telling myself that I was reading too much into ordinary friendliness, that my trust in both of them was more important than suspicion, and that my love for my wife would guide my judgment. Their private conversations became more frequent, and at times I could hear snippets of tone, softer, lower, intimate, drifting from another room or across the hall. They would whisper, laugh quietly, and occasionally pause as if they were hiding words from prying ears. I noticed that she was more distracted when I entered the room, that she would quickly change topics, close her phone, or step away if I appeared, all signs that I chose to ignore. I told myself repeatedly that my imagination was working against me, that these were coincidences, that trust required patience and understanding, and that overreacting would only harm our relationship. I clung to the belief that my marriage, our family, and our bond were unbreakable. I also began seeing changes in her routine. She would volunteer for errands or appointments that conveniently coincided with my cousin's visits. She spent longer periods outside the house for trivial reasons, claiming it was for shopping or personal calls, and sometimes returned flushed or unusually quiet. I noticed that she was more conscious of her appearance when he was around, dressing slightly differently, taking extra care with her hair and makeup, actions that once went unnoticed but now felt pointed. I told myself these were normal behaviors, that everyone cared about how they looked when friends or family were visiting, and that I was overanalyzing a natural desire for attention. Yet deep inside, a knot of unease formed in my chest that I tried to ignore, believing that my trust would protect me from doubt. Even her interactions with me changed subtly, though I only realized it later. She was polite, affectionate in ways I expected, but something had shifted. There was a distance, a slight withdrawal, as if part of her attention had been diverted elsewhere. She laughed at my jokes, but not as fully, smiled at my words, but not with the warmth I remembered, and sometimes looked past me, eyes catching something I could not see. These small differences were hard to quantify, easy to dismiss, yet each one chipped away at the unquestioned certainty I had once held. I resisted acknowledging them because I believed that suspicion could destroy the trust and love I had built over so many years. I convinced myself that my faith in her was more important than any fleeting doubts. During this period, I also observed how my cousin's behavior had subtly shifted. He seemed more comfortable around her than before, more familiar, more relaxed in a way that suggested privilege in their shared space. They would converse in hushed tones, exchange knowing smiles, and their jokes carried an intimacy I had never witnessed in their prior interactions. I reminded myself that he was family, that he had grown up with me, that his behavior had always been protective and respectful, and that my perception could be skewed by paranoia. But the patterns were undeniable, accumulating like droplets that would eventually form a flood. I ignored them, hoping that my trust, my faith, and my love would prevent anything harmful from developing between them. It was not just the smiles, whispers, or gestures. It was the small coincidences, the repeated interactions that seemed too convenient to be innocent. Invitations to dinner, moments where they seemed to coordinate without explanation, and a subtle mirroring of movements that hinted at shared secrets. All these created a tapestry of unease that I struggled to dismiss. I told myself that families share closeness, that cousins can be playful, and that friendships within marriage can have nuances I may not immediately understand. Yet, the intuition gnawed at me quietly, a persistent hum in the back of my mind that something was wrong, that my trust was being tested in ways I had never imagined. Through it all, I maintained my daily life, continuing to love my wife openly, to treat my cousin as family, and to honor the connections that had shaped my identity. I smiled when they were around, participated in conversations with ease, and maintained the illusion of normalcy while the truth slowly revealed itself in the shadows. I told myself that patience was key, that understanding came before accusation, and that trust could survive subtle shifts in behavior. But even as I reassured myself, the puzzle pieces were aligning, and I could sense that the calm exterior I maintained was fragile, that beneath it lay the growing realization that betrayal might be closer than I dared to admit. I also took note of her excuses, her explanations for small absences or changes in routine. They seemed plausible at first, reasonable on the surface, yet inconsistent when compared over time. I rationalize these inconsistencies as natural human error, forgetting, or oversight because the alternative, that my wife and cousin were plotting behind my back, was unbearable. I gave her every benefit of the doubt, clinging to trust as my anchor, ignoring the storm gathering quietly in the corners of my home. My love for her demanded faith, and my faith demanded silence, even when my instincts whispered otherwise. Eventually, these subtle changes accumulated into a pattern I could no longer ignore. The warmth in her eyes for him, the private glances, the hushed conversations, the excuses and inconsistencies, they formed a mosaic of betrayal, slowly revealing the truth I had feared. I realized then that love and trust, while powerful, cannot blind one to reality forever. I understood that the signs were there all along, that subtle changes are often the first whispers of deception, and that ignoring them can only prolong the inevitable heartbreak. I resolved, in that moment, that patience had its limits, that faith must be balanced with vigilance, and that I would need to act carefully and decisively. I would observe, gather proof, and plan for the moment when truth could not be ignored. I would confront betrayal not with chaos or anger, but with undeniable evidence, exposing the actions of those I once loved and trusted. My trust had been tested, subtly and persistently, and now the time had come to move from silent observation to deliberate action. And so, as the days continued, I watched, listened, and collected, understanding that the subtle changes I had once dismissed were the threads leading me toward the revelation I had to face. Trust, once broken, requires courage to restore balance, and I began preparing for the moment when the truth would no longer be hidden. This was the quiet build-up, the preparation, the long shadow of betrayal that would eventually give way to exposure, action, and the reclamation of dignity. The day I discovered the betrayal was not marked by drama or confrontation. It came quietly, unexpectedly, like a shadow slipping across a familiar room. I had returned home earlier than usual, my work finishing sooner than I anticipated, and I walked into a house that had always felt like a sanctuary. At first, everything seemed normal. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of dinner, the distant sound of a television playing somewhere. I called out her name softly, expecting the familiar greeting, the warmth of her voice, the comfort of routine. But something was off, a subtle tension in the air that I could not yet identify. Curiosity and instinct drew me toward the living room, where she had left her phone unattended on the table. Something compelled me to pick it up, to glance at the notifications she had quickly silenced, the messages she had thought were private. I did not need to unlock it to know that this was no ordinary communication. The pattern of exchanges, the timestamps, the consistent attention to one person, my cousin, all hinted at something I had suspected but could not allow myself to fully believe. As I opened the messages, I felt a cold weight in my chest, a premonition of heartbreak that I had been trying to avoid for weeks. The messages were intimate, far beyond what any reasonable friendship could justify. There were shared jokes, photographs, subtle words of affection, and plans to meet at times when I would be away or occupied. Each message confirmed a reality I had dreaded. My wife and my cousin had betrayed me together, secretly, under the veil of normalcy and trust. I could see their care in crafting words, the deliberate choice of timing, the way they referenced moments that only they shared. It was meticulous, intentional, and horrifying. The very people I had loved and trusted had woven a network of deceit, a private world in which I did not exist. I remember sitting down slowly, the phone trembling in my hand. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the life I had known with this new reality. Every memory I had cherished, family dinners, holidays, casual visits, late-night conversations, was suddenly tainted with the knowledge that their smiles and laughter were shared privately in ways that excluded me. I recalled the subtle changes I had noticed over months, the lingering glances, the hushed laughter, the small favors, the unexplained absences. Each detail I had dismissed, each excuse I had accepted, now crystallized into proof of their hidden world. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was a complete violation of trust and family bonds. My cousin, Someone I had grown up with, shared secrets and joys that were meant to be sacred, had chosen deceit over loyalty. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, the person I had believed would honor vows and promises, had allowed herself to be swayed, to give attention, affection, and intimacy to someone I considered family. Their actions were deliberate, calculated, and cruel. The shock was compounded by the realization that this was not a fleeting indiscretion, but an ongoing affair, maintained over weeks, perhaps months, with careful attention to avoid detection. I remember the moment I realized the full extent of their betrayal. There were photos exchanged secretly, videos, notes, and references to private encounters, all evidence of a relationship that was both emotional and physical. Each discovery cut deeper than the last, a layered pain that grew with every message I uncovered. My hands shook as I scrolled through, heart pounding, stomach churning, mind struggling to comprehend that those I trusted most had conspired against me. I had never imagined that family could wound me so profoundly, that the foundation of love and trust I had built could be undermined in such a way. There was also a cold clarity in the discovery. As the initial shock settled, I began to see the patterns clearly, connecting moments I had once dismissed as coincidences. She had been careful, aware of my presence, creating diversions, planning her actions with foresight. My cousin had been equally deliberate, ensuring meetings and communications occurred without suspicion. The subtle changes I had noticed, now painfully obvious, were part of a larger strategy of concealment. It was not random. It was intentional, methodical, and deeply personal. The realization made my anger simmer, but it also strengthened a sense of resolve. In that quiet, lonely moment, I felt the full weight of betrayal. I recalled every sacrifice I had made for her happiness, every compromise, every moment I had chosen trust over doubt, every act of love that had gone unnoticed or taken for granted. And I understood that their betrayal was a reflection of their choices, not of my worth or love. It was not about me being insufficient. It was about their willingness to deceive, to betray, to place selfish desires above family and marriage. I felt the sting of heartbreak, mingled with a rising determination that this could not remain hidden, that the truth must be revealed. The evidence I uncovered was comprehensive. Messages detailed secret plans, photographs captured moments meant to be private, and even recorded calls demonstrated the intimacy of their connection. Each piece of evidence added weight to the truth, a truth I could no longer ignore or suppress. I realized that confronting them privately would lead to lies, excuses, and denials. Their shared history, the bond of family, would give them the ability to manipulate and evade responsibility. The only way to honor my own dignity and reclaim the balance of justice was to prepare for exposure, to ensure the truth could not be hidden any longer. That night, I did not act impulsively. I sat quietly, gathering my thoughts, considering my next steps. I documented everything meticulously, saving messages, photographs, and recordings in a secure place. I considered the timing, the setting, and the audience that would witness the revelation. I knew that exposing them in public, in front of family, would not only ensure accountability, but also prevent any attempts to deny or distort the truth. My shock had transformed into a strategic resolve, a clear path to reclaiming my sense of justice, dignity, and control. By the end of that day, I understood that my life had changed irrevocably. Trust had been broken, loyalty betrayed, and family bonds shattered. Yet, the discovery also provided clarity and purpose. I realized that the only way to heal, to regain strength, and to confront the betrayal was through deliberate exposure, through ensuring that the truth would be seen and acknowledged. The quiet shock of discovery had given way to the fire of action, the desire to restore balance, and the courage to face the people who had wronged me. After the shocking discovery, life did not return to normal. Every moment became heavier, weighed down by the knowledge of betrayal that had been hidden behind smiles and familiarity. Days felt long and hollow, filled with tasks that once brought purpose but now seemed meaningless. Each time I saw my wife, I felt the sting of deception, the contrast between the love I had offered and the betrayal she had chosen. Even the simplest interactions, a shared meal, a glance across the room, a casual word, carried with them the sharp edge of deceit. It was a quiet suffering, invisible to the outside world, but overwhelming to my heart. I replayed memories over and over, trying to reconcile the person I loved with the actions I now knew she had taken. Every act of kindness, every shared joke, every small sacrifice I had made, they were tainted with the knowledge that she had been unfaithful, that she had allowed my cousin, a person I trusted as deeply as family, to enter a place in her life reserved for loyalty and love. I remembered evenings when I had stayed up late working, believing she was at home thinking of me, only to realize she had been planning secret meetings. Every innocent interaction I had assumed was genuine now carried a hidden meaning, a secret code I had failed to read. The anger was constant, but it was not explosive. It simmered quietly beneath the surface. I could not shout, could not confront, could not allow my emotions to betray me. Instead, I carried the weight in silence, hiding the fury behind a calm exterior. At work, I smiled, laughed with colleagues, and maintained appearances, but inside, the pain burned relentlessly. Each night, alone in my home, I replayed the messages and photographs I had discovered, letting the truth sink in fully. The betrayal was not a single act. It was a pattern, a consistent violation of trust that demanded careful thought and deliberate response. Sleep became a challenge. I would lie awake for hours, turning over every detail of the betrayal, imagining conversations, confrontations, and moments of revelation. I thought about my wife and my cousin, wondering how long they had planned their deception, how skillfully they had hidden it, and how little regard they had shown for the consequences. The pain was compounded by the fact that it was not strangers who had hurt me. It was the closest people in my life, those I had opened my heart to completely. The intimacy of the betrayal magnified the heartbreak, making each realization sharper, each memory darker. At times, the anguish transformed into a cold clarity. I began to see patterns I had ignored before, moments I had dismissed as coincidences. Her subtle changes in behavior, the lingering glances, the sudden enthusiasm when he arrived, they were pieces of a puzzle I had failed to complete. My cousin's actions, once considered harmless or even caring, were now unmistakably self-serving, manipulative, and cruel. The realization that I had been deceived not just by love, but by blood, intensified the pain. It was a betrayal layered with trust, intimacy, and family ties, and it cut deeper than any confrontation could. Yet, amidst the anger and heartbreak, a sense of determination grew. The silent suffering was not merely a punishment inflicted upon me, it became a source of strength. I realized that I could not allow this betrayal to go unaddressed. I understood that confronting them in private would be pointless. They would deny, manipulate, and twist the truth. The anguish, though heavy, sharpened my resolve. I began to plan carefully, considering the moment, the audience, and the method by which the truth could be revealed most effectively. Silence alone would not heal me. Action, deliberate and controlled, would be my path to justice. I also reflected on the depth of my love and the sacrifices I had made. Every gesture, every word, every moment of patience and understanding now seemed magnified against the backdrop of betrayal. I remembered how I had trusted them implicitly, how I had believed in family bonds and marital loyalty, how I had shielded them from doubt and suspicion. Each recollection fueled a sense of purpose. The anguish I carried became not just a burden, but a tool, a motivator to ensure that their deceit would not go unnoticed or unpunished. The weight of hidden knowledge also affected my interactions with others. Family gatherings, casual visits, and social events became opportunities to observe, to watch, and to wait. I noted subtle shifts in behavior, lingering looks, and whispered words. Each observation added to the narrative I was building in my mind, a narrative that would one day be revealed fully and completely. The anguish was a quiet companion, present in every glance, every step, every silent moment, shaping my understanding of the betrayal and my strategy for addressing it. In private, the pain was almost unbearable. I felt the sting of humiliation, the grief of lost trust, and the loneliness of knowing that those I had relied upon most had conspired against me. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, recalling conversations, reviewing messages, and imagining the impact of revelation. I felt the bitter irony that those I had protected, nurtured, and trusted had become the source of my deepest suffering. And yet, I refused to let despair dominate. The anguish transformed into quiet power, a readiness to act decisively when the time was right. I also came to understand that the betrayal was not a reflection of my worth. The pain of silent suffering taught me that their choices were about their character, not my value. I recognized that the hurt was real, but it did not define me. My dignity, patience, and careful planning became my allies. While they reveled in secrecy, I cultivated clarity and resolve, turning the anguish into a roadmap for justice. The silent nights, the heavy days, the constant awareness of deceit, all were preparing me for the moment when the truth would be undeniable and irreversible. By the time the family reunion approached, the silent anguish had matured into purpose. I had internalized the betrayal, fully understood its scope, and carefully considered the consequences of every action. My suffering had honed my mind, sharpened my intentions, and strengthened my resolve. I understood that revealing the truth publicly would not only serve justice, but also restore my own sense of balance, dignity, and control. The agony I had endured in silence had become a crucible, forging a plan that would ensure that betrayal did not triumph. After weeks of silent suffering and sleepless nights, I realized that patience would be my most powerful weapon. The betrayal was deep, layered with lies, and it demanded careful handling. I knew that a hasty confrontation would only allow my wife and cousin to twist the truth, deny everything, and manipulate those around us. I could not let emotion guide my actions. I had to be deliberate, calculated, and calm. Each thought, each movement, had to be purposeful. I began to devise a strategy that would expose them both completely, leaving no room for denial or excuse. The plan had to be precise, timed perfectly, and executed in a way that would reveal the full depth of their betrayal to everyone who mattered. I started by gathering undeniable proof. I saved messages, photographs, and call recordings. Each piece of evidence was cataloged carefully, stored securely, and reviewed repeatedly. I examined every word in the messages, every gesture in the photos, every tone in the recordings. Each detail mattered. I understood that their betrayal had relied on secrecy, and if I could dismantle that secrecy publicly, it would dismantle their power over me. I also considered how to present this evidence in a way that was undeniable, without exaggeration or embellishment. The truth alone was sharp enough to cut through their lies. Planning also meant choosing the right moment. The family reunion was weeks away, but I knew it would be the perfect stage. Everyone would be present, laughter and trust would fill the room, and my wife and cousin would be surrounded by those who knew them as friends and family. Their deception depended on the assumption that no one would ever suspect the depth of their betrayal. By choosing this moment, I could ensure the exposure would be absolute. Timing was crucial. I could not act too early, when suspicion was only partial, nor too late, when the opportunity to reveal everything to the people who mattered most had passed. I considered every potential obstacle. My wife might try to manipulate the crowd, cry, or appeal to emotion. My cousin might deny everything, claim misunderstanding, or attempt to humiliate me. To counter these possibilities, I ensured that the evidence was organized and undeniable. Each photograph corresponded with a message. Each recording confirmed the context. There would be no need for argument or debate. The strategy was simple in its intent. Expose the truth fully, allow the evidence to speak for itself, and remain calm throughout. I would not give them the opportunity to gaslight or twist reality. Preparation also involved controlling my own emotions. I spent hours alone, practicing calmness, visualizing the sequence of events, and imagining the reactions of everyone present. I understood that if I appeared angry or desperate, their attempts to distract from the truth might succeed. My exterior had to reflect dignity, patience, and control. Every step forward would be measured, every gesture deliberate. I rehearsed in my mind the moment I would rise, the way I would present the evidence, and the precise tone I would use. There would be no yelling, no accusations, no loss of control, only the truth laid bare. I also considered the psychological impact. Betrayal is often minimized or excused when left to private confrontation. By revealing it publicly, I ensured that the weight of their actions would be felt fully by themselves and by everyone around them. The strategy was not merely to humiliate, but to make the consequences of their choices undeniable. Each person in the room would witness the evidence, understand the depth of deceit, and see the true nature of those I had once trusted completely. Their betrayal had been secret, and secrecy had been their shield. My strategy would strip that shield away. In parallel, I mentally prepared for the aftermath. Exposing such betrayal would bring discomfort, judgment, and attention, not only for them, but for me as well. I had to remain composed and ready to handle reactions calmly. Gossip, whispers, and questions would inevitably follow, but I was determined to let the evidence speak louder than any words I might need to defend myself. The strategy extended beyond the immediate exposure. It included maintaining my own dignity, avoiding unnecessary conflict, and allowing the truth to be the ultimate verdict. Another key component of the strategy was patience. I had to wait until the reunion, ensuring that all relevant parties were present and the impact would be maximal. Acting too early could allow them to manipulate narratives or cover their tracks. By waiting, I not only ensured that the betrayal would be exposed in front of those who mattered, but also demonstrated control over a situation that they had assumed was entirely in their hands. My patience became a silent weapon, as powerful as the evidence itself. Every action, every decision leading up to the reunion was deliberate. I reviewed the evidence multiple times, making sure there were no gaps, inconsistencies, or room for misinterpretation. I considered seating arrangements, timing of announcements, and the flow of the event. I visualized how I would remain calm while the room reacted, how I would not be drawn into arguments, and how the weight of the betrayal would land squarely on the shoulders of those responsible. The strategy was as much mental preparation as it was logistical, ensuring that nothing would derail the revelation. I also acknowledged the personal transformation occurring within me. The silent suffering, the sleepless nights, and the anger had evolved into clarity, purpose, and strength. I understood that exposure was not merely revenge, it was a reclamation of control over my life and dignity. The strategy was not born out of malice alone, but out of a need to restore balance and assert truth in the face of deliberate betrayal. I recognized the power I held, the power of truth, evidence, and timing, and I resolved to use it wisely. As the reunion approached, the plan solidified into a step-by-step process. I knew when I would rise, how I would address the room, and the exact sequence in which the evidence would be revealed. The strategy was meticulous: reveal the recordings, show the messages, and ensure that there was no question left about the betrayal. Each moment was rehearsed in my mind, anticipating reactions, emotional responses, and attempts to deflect blame. The goal was absolute clarity, undeniable exposure of their actions, leaving them unable to hide behind lies or manipulation. Finally, I understood that the strategy extended beyond the reunion itself. The exposure would change family dynamics, relationships, and reputations permanently. My wife and cousin had assumed their betrayal would remain secret. My strategy ensured that secrecy was no longer possible, that trust would be shattered, and that the consequences of their choices would be visible to all who had once held them in esteem. The planning, patience, and mental preparation had transformed my anguish into a weapon, precise and sharp. By the time I stepped into the reunion hall, every element of the strategy was in place. My evidence was secure, my resolve was unshakable, and my emotions were under control. The silent suffering had matured into deliberate action. I knew the moment would come when I would rise, deliver the evidence, and allow the truth to reverberate throughout the room. Every step, every thought, every moment leading to that point had been part of the strategy, a strategy designed to ensure that betrayal could no longer hide, and that justice, calm, and truth would prevail. The day of the family reunion arrived with a mixture of anticipation and quiet tension. From the moment I stepped into the hall, I observed everything with careful attention, like a man surveying the battlefield before making a move. Laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses filled the air, but I noticed the subtleties, the way my wife moved, the way my cousin acted, the faint glances exchanged when they thought no one was watching. Every detail mattered. I had learned that betrayal thrives in secrecy, but even in public, subtle cues betray the guilty. I watched them carefully, noting how they behaved as if the past weeks had never happened, as if their deception had gone unnoticed. The hall was decorated with family photos, banners, and tables laden with food. Children ran around, cousins reunited after years apart, and a warm sense of togetherness permeated the space. I knew the contrast between this happy scene and the betrayal I carried in my heart would heighten the impact of what I planned to reveal. The reunion was more than just a gathering. It was a stage, and I had meticulously chosen it to ensure that the truth would be exposed in front of everyone who mattered. The larger the audience, the more undeniable the consequences. I positioned myself strategically, blending with the guests. I smiled and exchanged pleasantries, appearing calm and composed, while my mind replayed the evidence over and over. Each message, each photo, each recording, they were all carefully memorized. I reviewed how I would introduce them, the exact order in which they would be revealed, and the phrasing I would use to ensure clarity without embellishment. My wife and cousin, so confident in their deceit, moved freely among family members, laughing and engaging, completely unaware that the truth I held would soon shatter the facade they had built. As the reunion continued, I observed interactions carefully. My wife lingered near my cousin, laughing at his jokes, her hand brushing against his arm in ways that had once seemed innocent, but now screamed betrayal. My cousin's ease, the familiarity in his gestures, and the glances exchanged confirmed in my mind the depth of their audacity. I realized that their betrayal had not been impulsive or secretive in the beginning. It had grown, nurtured in private spaces, strengthened by trust, misplaced. Every moment of ease I observed made the upcoming exposure more necessary, more powerful, and more satisfying in its inevitability. I also took note of family members who were likely to be most shocked. Elderly relatives who had always trusted both my wife and my cousin would now be confronted with undeniable proof. Younger family members who had admired my cousin and my wife would have to reconcile the image of the people they trusted with the reality of their deception. The reunion had provided a full audience, an assembly of witnesses whose reactions would amplify the impact of the revelation. Every person present would carry the knowledge of what had happened, making it impossible for my wife or cousin to deny their actions. While observing, I quietly checked my materials one last time. The recordings were ready, organized by sequence to tell the story clearly. Messages were printed and photos labeled, each element cross-referenced to ensure coherence and prevent misinterpretation. I reminded myself to remain calm when the moment arrived. Anger, shouting, or dramatics would only diminish the effect. My strategy depended on controlled delivery and letting the evidence speak for itself. I needed to embody dignity and patience, demonstrating that truth, not fury, was my greatest tool. I thought back to the nights of silent anguish, when I had replayed their words in my mind, imagining the moment I could confront them in front of everyone. Those nights of pain had hardened my resolve and clarified my purpose. I realized that exposure in this setting would not only reveal betrayal, but also restore balance. Family members would understand the truth, see the deceit, and recognize my composure in handling it. The reunion, filled with trust and connection, would become the stage for justice and clarity, a moment where deception could no longer hide behind familiar smiles or polite conversation. Throughout the gathering, I maintained outward composure. I greeted relatives, participated in small talk, and even shared laughter when appropriate, all while the storm of anticipation brewed quietly within me. My wife and cousin, unaware of the imminent revelation, continued their charade, laughing and engaging with family as though nothing had changed. I observed their confidence and realized it would soon crumble. Every movement, every casual gesture would be reframed by the proof I held. The contrast between their outward innocence and the truth I carried would heighten the impact of exposure. I also mentally rehearsed the moment of confrontation. I imagined standing, silencing the room, and presenting the evidence in a calm, controlled voice. I visualized the sequence of reactions: shock, disbelief, murmurs spreading, and their faces draining of color. I prepared for attempts at denial or manipulation, knowing that each would fail against the weight of indisputable evidence. The mental preparation was as important as the physical preparation. It ensured that when the moment arrived, I would not falter, waver, or give them an opportunity to redirect attention. Finally, I waited for the right moment. The reunion reached a natural pause, with everyone gathered in the main hall for a toast. Conversation slowed, and attention focused toward the center. I recognized that this was my opportunity, a moment when eyes would be on me, when the impact of revelation would be immediate and widespread. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past weeks, months, and years of trust and betrayal, and readied myself to act. The stage was set, the audience assembled, and the evidence was ready. I knew that when I rose, everything would change, and the reunion would become the scene where betrayal was exposed, consequences were inevitable, and truth prevailed. The calm before action was profound. I sensed the gravity of what was about to occur, yet my mind was steady, my purpose clear. This was not a moment for rash emotion or public spectacle. It was a moment for truth, for justice, and for reclaiming dignity. The stage had been chosen, the plan carefully orchestrated, and the audience ready. All that remained was for me to rise and allow the undeniable evidence of betrayal to speak louder than any accusation or plea. The reunion, once a symbol of family unity, would bear witness to the reality of deception, the consequences of betrayal, and the quiet strength of a man who had endured and prepared. When the moment arrived, I rose slowly, making sure every eye in the hall turned toward me. The laughter and chatter of the family quieted instantly. I could feel the tension shift in the room, like the air itself recognizing that something significant was about to happen. My wife looked at me first, her confident smile faltering just slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. My cousin's posture stiffened, and I saw him glance nervously around, realizing perhaps for the first time that the truth he had ignored would be displayed openly. I held the envelope tightly in my hand, containing photos, messages, and recordings that would leave no room for denial. I walked toward the center of the gathering, each step deliberate, my mind focused entirely on the evidence. I could see family members exchanging glances, curiosity, and concern written across their faces. My heart beat steadily, not with anger, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had endured betrayal and was now poised to restore balance. I knew that shouting, anger, or dramatics would only undermine the power of the truth. Calm, measured delivery would let the proof speak for itself, and I intended for it to do so clearly and unmistakably. Once I reached the front, I opened the envelope and began showing the evidence. Photos and messages were displayed, their content undeniable. The recordings played, the voices of my wife and cousin whispering secrets, planning meetings, laughing at their deception. The room went silent, every ear attentive, every eye fixed on the unfolding revelation. I read aloud the most incriminating messages, the words carefully chosen to communicate the betrayal without embellishment, ensuring that everyone understood the full extent of what had occurred. My wife's face turned pale, her lips pressed tightly together, and my cousin could no longer hide the shame in his eyes. The reactions were immediate. Gasps filled the hall. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the sense of trust that had previously defined the reunion evaporated. Relatives leaned forward, some in disbelief, others in shock, struggling to reconcile the friendly and familiar faces before them with the undeniable betrayal now laid bare. My wife tried to speak, her voice trembling, but the weight of proof left her unable to manipulate the narrative. My cousin looked down, humiliated, his confident facade crumbling in front of family who had once respected him deeply. The quiet dignity I maintained contrasted sharply with their panic and guilt. emphasizing the power of truth over deception. As I stood there, presenting the evidence with steady hands and clear eyes, I realized the moment had achieved exactly what I had intended. The reunion, meant to celebrate family, had become the stage for justice, where betrayal was revealed in full clarity. No one could question the facts. No one could excuse the actions. The humiliation of my wife and cousin was complete, but the restoration of truth and dignity for myself and the family who had been unknowingly deceived was equally complete. The room, once filled with joy, now carried the gravity of reality, and I remained calm, letting the evidence, not my emotions, deliver the final verdict. The reaction from the family was immediate and intense. The room, which moments ago had been full of chatter, laughter, and the warmth of reunion, turned heavy with tension and disbelief. Eyes widened, mouths opened in shock, and some relatives instinctively covered their faces, unable to fully process the magnitude of what had been revealed. The betrayal wasn't just between husband and wife, or between friends. It was blood deep, reaching into the trust and bond that family members had taken for granted. The whispers began immediately, growing louder as people tried to comprehend what they had just seen and heard. Some of my relatives were visibly angry, their faces red with the fire of betrayal. My wife attempted to speak, her voice trembling as she tried to explain, to justify, or to excuse her actions, but no words could undo what had been laid bare. Her cousin, the man I had once trusted like a brother, stood frozen, the weight of shame pressing him into stillness. Every attempt to reclaim dignity failed, and I could see the realization settle on their faces. There was no escape from the truth. The family, who had once celebrated their closeness, now recoiled in horror, struggling to reconcile the image of their loved ones with the reality of their deceit. The younger members of the family were stunned into silence, their eyes darting between the guilty and the evidence, trying to understand how someone they trusted could betray so deeply. Older members, who had lived through their own trials and understood the power of loyalty, were quick to condemn the acts, their judgment firm and unwavering. It was clear that respect, once held, had evaporated. The cousin who had once been admired for his charm now appeared small and weak, his betrayal magnified by the eyes of those who had believed in him without question. The whispers and murmurs grew into audible discussions, each person reacting in their own way, but all understanding the same reality. Deception had been exposed. The impact on my wife was immediate. Her face, once so confident and composed, turned pale and drawn. Every effort to manipulate the situation, to cry or plead, fell flat against the solid wall of evidence. Relatives who had looked up to her now looked away with disappointment and disdain. Her social standing within the family, carefully built over the years, collapsed in a matter of minutes. My cousin, too, faced instant ostracization as people questioned how someone so close, someone they trusted implicitly, could commit such a violation of trust. It was a collapse of status, reputation, and perceived integrity, all orchestrated by the simple, undeniable truth that I had presented. Through it all, I stood quietly, observing the fallout without a word. My presence was a silent reminder of the integrity I had maintained, the loyalty I had offered, and the calm that comes from truth triumphing over deceit. No one could argue, no one could manipulate the facts, and the weight of betrayal settled squarely on those who had committed it. In that moment, the family reunion, meant to celebrate togetherness, became a testament to accountability, exposing the hidden treachery and restoring, in its place, the understanding that loyalty is not just an expectation. It is a bond that cannot be broken without consequence. After the chaos settled into stunned silence and murmured whispers, I realized my work was done. The evidence had spoken for itself, and the room no longer held power over me. Every eye had seen the truth. Every mind had registered the betrayal, and there was no further need for confrontation. I did not raise my voice. I did not gesture angrily, and I did not demand apologies. I simply straightened my back, took a deep breath, and began walking toward the exit. Each step felt lighter, each movement deliberate, carrying with it the calm assurance that truth had finally prevailed over lies. As I passed through the stunned crowd, I could feel the weight of judgment falling on my wife and cousin. Relatives whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others turning away entirely, unable to look at those who had once held their trust. I noticed the betrayal reflected in their eyes, shame, anger, disappointment, and understood that the humiliation of exposure was far greater than any private confrontation could have achieved. The power had shifted, quietly but completely, into the hands of truth. I carried no anger, only the sense of satisfaction that comes from restoring balance to what had been so violently disrupted by deceit. The whispers followed me, but they were no longer aimed at me. Every murmured question, every shocked gasp, every incredulous look landed on the guilty parties. My wife's face had lost its color, her confidence shattered into tiny fragments. My cousin, who had once been admired and trusted, shrank under the weight of collective judgment. I could feel their panic, their attempts to form explanations in their minds, but nothing would undo what had been done. I did not look back, because there was no reason to. I had already seen enough. Their own actions had created this moment, and their downfall was complete. I walked out into the fresh air, the noise and chaos of the reunion fading behind me. The cool breeze against my face brought a sense of release I had not felt in months. Betrayal had haunted me quietly, feeding doubt and sorrow day by day, but now it had been transformed into clarity and closure. I did not rush. I did not run. I simply allowed myself to move forward, leaving them to face the consequences they had earned. The relief was profound. The burden I had carried alone now lifted. Every lie had been exposed, every secret unveiled, and justice had been delivered in its purest form. This exit was not a dramatic gesture, nor a scene of confrontation. It was the embodiment of restraint, dignity, and calculated patience. I had chosen the high ground, letting the truth speak louder than anger or vengeance ever could. Each step away from the room was a step toward freedom, a reclamation of my own life from the hands of those who had betrayed me. Silence, when coupled with evidence, proved more powerful than any argument, and the quiet dignity of my departure magnified the impact of the revelation itself. By the time I reached my car, the sounds of the reunion were a distant echo. I felt a calm certainty settle within me. The betrayal had been met with exposure, the lies dismantled, and the guilty parties left to face the consequences. I had not acted impulsively, I had not shouted, I had not lost myself in anger. I had relied on the simplest, most unshakable weapon, truth. As I drove away, I understood that this quiet exit had been the final act of justice, the ultimate reclaiming of my dignity. I did not need their apologies. I did not need their recognition. The truth had already spoken, and it had spoken loudly. Now, years later, I look back on that day with a calm mind and steady heart. Time has softened the sting of betrayal, but it has not erased the lessons it taught me. I realize now that trust is fragile, and when it is broken, it leaves wounds that no words can fully heal. Yet, I also understand that dignity, patience, and the courage to act with clarity can turn even the deepest pain into a form of quiet power. I do not dwell on anger or resentment. Instead, I carry the memory as a reminder of the strength that comes from knowing your own worth and protecting it. I often think about my wife and my cousin, the two people whose betrayal cut deepest because it came from love and family. They believed they could hide their actions, manipulate the truth, and avoid consequences. But deception, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually meets its reckoning. That day at the reunion, every hidden glance, every whispered secret, every false smile was exposed. Their pride, their comfort, their sense of untouchable control crumbled in the space of a few moments. Witnessing their downfall without raising my voice or engaging in confrontation was a lesson in the quiet power of evidence and truth. The world heard what they could not deny, and I was free from the burden they had imposed. As I reflect on the experience, I realize the importance of self-respect and patience. In life, betrayal is often unexpected and painful, but it can also serve as a mirror, showing us who truly values us and who does not. I learned that anger and revenge are fleeting if not guided by clarity. My method was not impulsive, it was deliberate. I waited, I gathered proof, and I chose the exact moment when exposure would leave no room for denial. The satisfaction came not from shaming them, but from reclaiming my own life, my own peace, and my own dignity. I discovered that the simplest actions, a quiet presentation of truth, can be more devastating than any outburst of fury. Looking back, I see that betrayal and heartbreak, while excruciating, can be transformed into lessons of resilience. They taught me that those we love are not always the people we think they are, and that the bonds of family or friendship can be broken by greed, desire, or selfishness. Yet, even in the deepest pain, there is an opportunity to act with integrity. By exposing the truth calmly and respectfully, I upheld my own principles, avoided unnecessary conflict, and let justice unfold naturally. The reunion, once a place of laughter and trust, became a stage where truth spoke louder than any deceit. In my old age, I share this story not to boast, but to remind others that betrayal is not the end of your life. It is a test of your character. I did not lose myself to anger or bitterness. I did not retaliate recklessly. Instead, I acted with clarity, patience, and precision. The experience shaped me, strengthened me, and reminded me that truth, no matter how painful, is the ultimate weapon against lies. And so, I tell this story calmly, with no need for dramatics, because the lesson is in the power of evidence, the value of patience, and the quiet triumph of dignity over deceit. Final thought. They betrayed me in secret, but I exposed them in front of everyone. In the end, it was truth that freed me, and it was silence and patience that made the exposure powerful. They lost their pride, I regained my peace, and that was enough.